What is up, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of Father Dynasty. I'm your fatherly host, Chu, here in the manhole, here to talk a little fatherhood, fantasy football, and everything in between. And with me today is a very special guest. I think you know him, and I know you love him. He was kind enough to gift me the CMC jersey, as you see behind, going with the theme. And at month's end, I'll be celebrating his soon-to-be marriage with Katie Feeney. Go team. Jake, how you doing, buddy?
Chew, I ain't as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was.
You're not wrong at all. And Jake, I was going to say, representing Charlotte FC behind you, so I'd love to see it.
Happy to do it. You can kind of see my scarf here. There's the logo.
Yeah, buddy. Well, Jake, I think there's one thing we just need to get off our respective chests, and this actually is a segment I don't think I've done since you were last on, and I think you'll enjoy it. And do a little roast me or toast me.
I roasted you to your face. I may have just roasted you behind your back.
Jake, are we ready to talk the devastating, the earth-shattering, the testicle-twisting Brock Purdy trade that I just completed 2 days ago, yesterday, something like that? Well, it was yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, Chew, I'm ready to – you should be charred, tarred, and barred from fantasy football after that move.
I love it. Well, I did not have time to put a little visual up, but I will say it, and I will watch your body melt off of the screen. So we've got me sending Cam Akers, Kadarius Toney, the 102 this year, and then the 306 also this year. And I'm getting the 105 this year, 2024 second, don't know what that's going to be, Brock Purdy, and Tyler Boyd. So
yeah, a lot.
Do you want to attempt to explain it, or do you want to just go for it?
You know, I'm glad I'm sitting down for this, Chew, because there's a lot to unpack there. And irregardless, we're not even going to touch the UCL tear for Brock Purdy, if that tells you how distraught I am over this trade. First and foremost, I think you start with Cam Akers, who I believe was second in the league in terms of yards per carry over the final 5 games of the season. He missed 2 for the incident, we'll call it, with Sean McDermott. McDermott's coming back next year, so no drama there. I'm also assuming Matt Stafford is coming back. But once Akers got the personal issues sorted out with the team obviously was full steam ahead with Akers because they let go of third-round pick 2 years ago in Darrell Henderson. Just adios, goodbye, hasta luego. And Akers is you know the workhorse, bell cow, whatever cliche you want to use. And he was firing on all cylinders. I mean, he was at nearly 5 yards to carry the final 5 games of the season, like I mentioned. And then you give up Kadarius Toney, who seems to have the traits, who showed out a couple of times, especially in Dallas last year with the Giants. This year has struggled a bit. I think he's still more interested in his rap career than he is his football career, but he showed flashes even with the Chiefs, and he could be the number 1 wide receiver, assuming that Juju Smith-Schuster is gone from Kansas City on his 1-year deal after this year. So in that offense, my goodness, if you could be half of what Tyreek Hill was, granted that's a brash assumption, but he could be something special. So I think long story long, I think you gave the 2 best players in the trade for a quarterback who might be a perennial backup and might never see a meaningful snap in the rest of his career. You're looking at Trey Lance, who is a first-round pick from 2 years ago, who we've yet to really have a chance to truly see after 1 game this past season. They're going to go back to him irregardless of the UCL tear for the next season or 2 to see what they actually have. And, we've seen it with CJ Beathard and Nick Mullins previously that quarterbacks can be successful alongside running backs you've never heard of, and like Jeff Wilson, Elijah Mitchell, to name a few. Kyle Juszczyk is strong as like an H-back type role. So Shanahan has this way of a system or scheme, whatever you want to call it, just brings out the best in people. So I really think that it was a stretch, and you also dropped back from pick 2 to pick 5, and I know you have, for those listening, you also have picks 3 and 4 in our Dynasty League, in our rookie Dynasty draft. And so I felt like you weren't getting a lot of substance back, even with Tyler Boyd, who at best is a strong wide receiver 3, probably a wide receiver 2 on another team. But I mean, he's got 2 of the best wide receivers in the world. Kind of, well, for lack of a better term, holding him back. So In that pick too, you're either giving up QB1 in the draft or you're giving up Bijan Robinson, who is the best running back prospect in half a decade. So I'm getting more upset the more I talk about it. So I take a moment, pause, and try to listen and think about what was the thought process? Was there a thought process? I'm sure there was one.
Jake, I love that callback. It took me back to so many episodes ago. That was spot on, by the way. So this trade was after the game, obviously. Well, let's see. So it was before the official UCL injury, out 6 months, whatever. Obviously, but he was hurt, couldn't go back in, kind of forced him to go back in. So regardless, there was some sort of injury he was dealing with and didn't look phenomenal in what limited action he had in the his last playoff game of the season. Yep. And what I had seen over the last couple of games when he was, I would assume if there wasn't the injury to Trey Lance in week 2, I would assume if it wasn't Jimmy G going down, and I don't even think he was healthy, even in that game that Brock Purdy was playing this most recent playoff game. As far as I understood it, it wasn't like Jimmy G was healthy, but they chose Brock Purdy. I think Jimmy G wasn't going to play regardless, which is why they probably had Josh Johnson going in. But I felt like, I know back in college, I believe it was Iowa State, Brock Purdy playing. He seemed like a bit of an enigma in the sense of he'd have some flashy plays, and then his decision-making sometimes was just like, what on earth are you doing? And I'm not saying that's a good thing by any means. Certainly decision-making, staying cool under pressure, having all the traits. I know he's a bit shorter, a bit of a stocky build, but ultimately he's not the 6'3", 6'4", uber athletic, big-armed kind of guy. But definitely a gamer, if I'm going to use another cliche, much like a thrower of balls. But when I see him, I know for a fact that if in this upcoming season, he recovers and everything, or God forbid he has setbacks, and he doesn't become the starter in San Fran and ultimately anywhere else, I'm sure, this trade was, regardless of what else happens, unless Akers and Tony both go down and just retire, then this trade is a loss. This trade, there's no way that I could recover anything like that. But how I'm seeing it is it's on the weight of Purdy being the starter there. And I know that it certainly helps that, really Trey Lance is ultimately pretty cheap. I know they did what they spent to get him, but in terms of him being a first-round quarterback, assuming he's the guy, that's much cheaper than, these second contracts that all these quarterbacks are getting. So whether it's Trey Lance, whether it's Brock Purdy, they're both infinitely very cheap. But my hope is that the Kyle Shanahan system of with their running backs, it doesn't matter where we drafted you. If we believe in you and we think you can run this system and run it the best, we're going to have you play football for us. And I'm hoping, I know Trey Lance has gotten some spots here and there, but of course, this season didn't even finish the second game before he broke his ankle. So who knows how he's going to come back. But I like Trey Lance coming out of college, but I know he was, limited action in college, and they were saying, how is he going to turn out? Uber athletic, big frame, big arm. But I think Brock Purdy can best manage this offense, because I think what Jimmy G's proven, it's not necessarily a game manager, but it's someone who understands and is very cerebral in the sense of like, let Shanahan kind of put you in a box in most of the game to kind of just follow the system. And when you need to be unleashed, know when to do that. And I think we saw brief moments of that with Purdy. And, I know it was in about half a season, but with that, the falling back from the 102 to the 105, I do have the third and the fourth. So yeah. I'm skipping over myself basically, but Boyd was kind of just an ad there. And with Akers and Tony, I think once I actually decided to do this trade, including Tony, I was watching the Chiefs game and I saw Tony go down on a pretty regular play. And it was bringing me back to the moments of, we think Tony's going to do it. I know he had that big boom game in London against the Cowboys. And that was like, this is the human joystick. This is the guy that when you watch him in college, I don't care that he's 24 years old. I don't care that, all that off the field weirdness, I guess. That's the guy that we want. That's the guy we're paying for. That's the guy that is going to be an all-star on this team. I'm nervous that between that and then with Akers, he did finish the other season, last couple of games, I believe it was his rookie season, incredibly well. And then it just kind of disappeared a little bit towards Achilles, came back, didn't do great in the playoffs. But I'm worried that if I wait too long on both of those guys, the upside's incredible. Cam Akers being a bell cow, Kadarius Toney not being a Tyreek Hill, but being at a minimum a good, if not great weapon in Kansas City. But if both of them fizzle out, I'm very worried that I'm going to be left holding the bag of guys that the floor is low based on injury and just inconsistency and all that, but the ceiling is tremendously high. So it's a lot of like, I gave away my lottery tickets and I gave away, moved back a couple of picks, and I'm taking in not a sure thing by any means in Brock Purdy, but by training camp, if he's not the guy, I lost this trade and there's no question. But I'm hoping that he's the guy, and I'm hoping that he can be that consistent, QB2 weekly top 15, maybe back in like top 12 upside. And then that offense, I believe he could do that.
So what I'm hearing is you gave away two $20 lottery tickets for a $2 lottery ticket. I'm just putting it bluntly. By the way, Trey Lance is younger than Will Levis, and Trey Lance just finished his second year in the league. So we don't know what Trey Lance is. I can't do the math for the trade. I love you. That one I don't see. I wish you the best, and that you hope for the best and pray about the worst. And I feel like you might be doing a lot of fantasy praying this fall, Chew.
Well, that's all right. Well, I will certainly be doing that. And next, what we'll be doing is little cap or no cap recaps. Are you ready?
I told you I wouldn't take any prisoners.
Let's do it. So back on episode 47, for those loyal listeners, we did a Happy Camper segment, and that was before 2022 in training camp, and it was looking at the Happy Campers, came up with the Sad Campers, and just a hot take that each of us had. And going with your buys and sells and your bold take here. So your buys, you were loving some Travis Etienne and some Parris Campbell. You maybe we're not too psyched on the overall rookie preseason hype as a whole. And bold take being Albert O finishing as a top 10 fantasy tight end. So how are you feeling about kind of like your look back on that episode and just kind of how it unfolded?
Yeah, I'll start with the good, the bad, and then we'll touch on the ugly. So Etienne was a rock star, and it took him a few weeks to get going, but once the Jaguars moved on from James Robinson, it was the Travis Etienne show. And that was really special to see. And I think, if he puts a little bit of weight on and can maintain that speed and athleticism, he's going to be a really special player and possibly a top 10 dynasty, not just running back, but player over the next 3 to 4 years, which will be truly something special to watch given, what he was able to do at Clemson and now in the NFL. I know another preseason all-star that I was looking at was Parris Campbell, and he obviously was a second-round pick from the Colts in his first 3 years, had been injured quite often. We truly hadn't seen the best of him. And I think we saw flashes of what Parris Campbell could be this year, but he also had 8 weeks outside of the top 50, even though he finished the year with just over 50 receptions. So I think at 25 years old, it was a nice year given the trials and tribulations of the injured past that he's kind of endured. I think that he has a place on a dynasty, let alone an NFL team. So I wouldn't say that's a loss. I would say that the jury's still out, and we're kind of punting until next year on that one. Was there anybody else you wanted me to touch on, or is that a pretty good start for the good, the bad, and we can touch on the ugly in a bit?
Yeah, I think that was it, because I think the sale, I know you're talking about just rookie preseason hype, which was more of like a global just idea of, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I know, of course, one of my buys, Ashton Dulin. So I would say the Robin to Parris Campbell's Batman in terms of his ultimate production. And he was a preseason darling. He had a couple of really, really cool, Twitter videos. That was about it. I think he had one somewhat notable game, but finishing as the wide receiver, 123 in PPR is not a crowning achievement necessarily. But I know with that offense, I mean, with Parris Campbell too, he had some good weeks, but with what was happening with the quarterback room there, Alec Pierce did kind of step into his own a bit as a rookie. Yep. Michael Pittman is Michael Pittman, but I'm curious to see how this goes going forward with who is the quarterback there. I have to believe they're going to draft one and not get a free agent like they had with Phillip Rivers and all those guys. And curious to see who the coach is ultimately. I know as of today, a couple of coaches had filled in with the Broncos and then with the Texans. So a couple of more dominoes to fall. So hopefully Colts get the right guy as a head coach. They get the right guy at the quarterback, and they can feed both of our wide receivers that we're talking about.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to be Jeff Saturday, by the way?
I really hope not, but it might be. Yeah. I could see it being like, hey, I'll give you another season and we'll see how it goes. I don't see it. If it is Jeff Saturday, I don't see it being like, we're going to give you a 5 or 7 year deal. We believe in you. This is it. I could see it being like, well, you only had like part of a season to work. I know you don't have any head coaching experience, but you have a little bit now, and the team was horrible. So what if we give you a quarterback? How could that be? And what's your staff going to look like now? So I could see him kind of talking Irsay into being like, yeah, just keep doing this.
Yeah, that would be a total Irsay move. And I won't veer us too far off topic, but, Saturday beat what was it, the Raiders, I think, in his opening debut as coach, and it was kind of an epic win down to the last minute, whatnot. And then he lost 7 or 8 straight. And not only did he lose 7 or 8 straight, but in that stretch, he also lost. I think it was the biggest comeback or second biggest comeback in NFL history.
Yeah,
they were down 31 to the Rams. I mean, the Rams aren't even a playoff team.
Mm-hmm.
That's ugly. That is ugly. And he got a pass because, he obviously was an NFL commentator. He was on television, a week prior to being an NFL coach. But that would be a total Irsay move. And I don't think that bodes well for our fantasy prospects either, to be honest.
Yeah, because I'm curious to see, whether they stay. Are they like the 5th pick or 6th pick or something? So, I mean, they're already pretty early, but I guess they could hypothetically get jumped. So they may have to make an aggressive move to get the Bears pick or something. I mean, if they don't get, one of Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, I hope somebody buys into Will Levis and he goes sooner, so then all the rest of them can fall. They need a guy. I'm nervous if it's like, yeah, we'll just go get Derek Carr and we'll run this whole thing back again. That could be okay, but I think they really need to build a culture around a younger quarterback that can be the future with a couple of weapons there. Of course, Jonathan Taylor too. I mean, there's the people there for sure, but.
Dude, there's no way they do that because they went Phillip Rivers, Jacoby Brissett, Matt Ryan, and it has not been pretty. I mean, I know they made what's that?
Carson Wentz. I almost forgot that one.
Oh my gosh. See? I mean, talk about forgettable. I mean, my goodness. So, I mean, you've got 4 retread quarterbacks. I mean, Phillip Rivers, not retread, but he was also 38, 39 years old, and he made the playoffs. But I mean, it is not. I mean, it's left a lot to be desired in Indianapolis, and nobody is afraid to admit that one.
Absolutely. Well, it was good to recap and kind of think about where we've been. We're talking about where we're here now, and where we're here now is the Senior Bowl, and the bowl itself is not taking place till this weekend. But I know we have practices and we have measurements and all that kind of stuff coming in. Who were a couple of guys that maybe you were interested in seeing, whether it be, seeing their actual measurements of like, was that running back that weight, or just kind of seeing them get some game action? Yeah.
And by the way, you buried the lead there. It's the Reese's Senior Bowl. And I think I'm going to go down and have some Reese's Pieces to be specific. Once we finish this podcast. I appreciate you asking because the Senior Bowl is always fun. And by the way, the Senior Bowl director, Jim Nagy, is an awesome follow on Twitter for any of you Dynasty fiends. He talks a lot about prospects and not just, getting to know them, but specifics in terms of their measurables and statistics and sort of in-depth knowledge that I don't think you can just, Google for that matter. Just for a specific example, I'd never heard of Josh Palmer from Tennessee. Other than watching a Saturday at 3 p.m. Saturday afternoon game on CBS, and when he played at Tennessee. So it was really eye-opening when Jim Nagy said, hey, pay attention to Josh Palmer. And he's making some noise as the wide receiver /2 or 3, depending on the week and who's playing for the Chargers. But he could be something really special given Keenan Allen's age and, Mike Williams' future, and we just re-signed the contract, but he's also 28, 29 years old. So Josh Palmer could be something really special, and I owe that thanks to Jim Nagy. Sorry for my tangent, Shu, but I think in terms of this year, I would say that there are 2 players that I would specifically call out that I'm really excited to watch and to hear how they practice. The first is Luke Musgrave, and I'm going to look at my notepad here. And I say that because Mel Kiper has him as number 22 on his big board. this is a guy who played 2 games this regular season. He played the bowl game against Florida, but he had 11 receptions this year. He had 36 career receptions prior to this year. And by the way, this is coming off a major knee injury that caused him to miss, 3 months of the season. So I think I'm very curious to see what a player of this caliber can bring, especially if he's on Mel Kiper's big board at number 22. He's 6'6", 250 pounds, according to Oregon State. We'll see what he measures at the combine. But 11 catches and 1 touchdown in, call it 3 games with the bowl game. Very intrigued to see if this is a top 50 player, let alone top 20, 25 player. So I think he's above and beyond number 1 for me. And then number 2 would be a name I can hardly pronounce. I believe it's Andrei Iosivas. That's probably butchered the last name, but he's a Princeton wide receiver. He's 6'3", 200 pounds. And allegedly he runs a 4.29 chew. So I think I'd seen him. I think he was on. He's at least on some draft boards. I think he's considered like a 3rd or 4th round. Maybe a late Friday, early Saturday round pick. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name again. I'll just call him the Princeton wide receiver. But if he's that quick and has that size, I mean, those are a couple of really big ifs. But I'm very anxious to see how he could do at the Senior Bowl against premier competition. I think when I thought about him, I was drawing comparisons to Christian Watson, given the size and speed from the Packers. And Christian Watson showed some really strong flashes for the Packers this year. So I think he's somebody I'm going to have a close eye on, just given the fact that he's from the FCS ranks and is now in the Senior Bowl. I think the Senior Bowl is a little bit overrated, kind of like the Combine, because you've already seen these guys play. But these 2 in particular, I would say that I haven't seen them play. So I'm very interested to see. I think this is a very, very important week for those 2 in terms of their draft stock.
Yeah, I had seen people talking about as I'll stick with your nomenclature, that Princeton wide receiver. I'd seen the name.
You pronounce it? I mean, it's got to be.
I've never heard it said. I've just read it so many. I've never actually heard someone say it. I don't know.
All right, so let's spell it out for the folks here listening. Andrei. I'm just going to go ahead on a limb here and say that that's Andre.
Yeah, I believe that.
Last name Iosivas. I said Iosivas, but that's probably horrendous.
I'd say either that or no. That's got to be it. Unless there's some sort of like couple silent letters that like you're seeing.
Don't pop out on me. Give me a pronunciation.
Iosivas.
Okay.
That sounds like a tennis player. So I don't know if
like the VAS could be silent type thing. Okay, I'm on board.
Well, yeah, we'll report back in when I actually find out how they say their name.
Deal.
I would like to think that everyone else also just refers to him as the Princeton receiver because they don't even want to try it. Oh man, but I mean, a guy like that, I did not know that he would reportedly have that kind of speed. I know they were I kept hearing people talk about like, you got to watch this guy, but I didn't kind of see any reference to the speed. So I feel like something like that. I know what you're mentioning about the Senior Bowl, the Reese Senior Bowl, and the Combine, of how a lot of it is a bit overblown. But I guess the exciting thing about the Senior Bowl is something like that, with having that kind of speed and that kind of size. That is something that can be on full display. So you may not know specifically what he's clocking there, but being able to see him against just other competition and just watch him on the outside just cook a DB, that could be something fun to see. And I'm sure that's a clip that will likely, at least in fantasy people's minds, boost his stock to get that outside, like you're saying, a Christian Watson type receiver. So that'd be great.
Totally.
Yeah. And Luke Musgrave, that was an interesting one too. So back in high school, he played for his football team, defensive end, wide receiver, and tight end. But more interestingly, he played lacrosse and he did ski racing and track, I assume, I don't know if he was running or if he was just launching the shot put, but I'm imagining a guy that is, I think he measured in at like 6'5.5", 255. I'm imagining that guy playing lacrosse. I would be shitting my pants if I had that guy running at me with a lacrosse stick. So yeah, not a lot of tape necessarily for Musgrave, but I mean, that kind of size and athleticism as a inline tight end, that would be terrifying. And one guy I was interested in, partially just even trying to watch his tape anywhere I could find it, looked like I was holding the camera while I was like falling down. Tyler Badgent, the guy from the Shepherd Rams Division II. Interested to see, what everybody thinks of him. I mean, even at the Senior Bowl, I know just the other players that are there, I don't know what that's going to reveal necessarily. I think a combination of that and the combine, he'll still be a later pick for some team, but I could definitely see some team spending actual draft capital to get that guy. And I mean, at worst, he kind of has the build of like a very like decently tall, athletic wide receiver and moves pretty well. But I mean, he does have a pretty decent arm. So I don't know how the D2 quarterback game translates to the NFL necessarily. I don't have any reference points for that. But curious to see how that all shakes out for him. And one other guy I was interested in too, Tyjae Spears out of out of Tulane, the Green Wave.
Yep.
He reportedly measured in 5'9.5", and he measured in above 200 pounds at 204. So I know that's that all too elusive. If you're a small running back, if you get over 200, close to 205, then we can overlook the fact that you're small. And I mean, he's quick, he's shifty, he's very fun to watch. I know the concern was the size, but I mean, he did have a torn ACL in 2020, but came back and had 2 strong years in college. So I know the fantasy community loves him, but I'm also hoping that the NFL community and those GMs and those owners fall in love with him and give him hopefully day 2 draft capital. Probably not, but we'll see what happens there. But any thoughts on any of those guys or anybody else?
Yeah, I'll start with Spears. I mean, I hadn't seen him. Obviously, Tulane was 10-2 in the regular season this year, so they were doing something right down there in New Orleans. But he shredded USC in that bowl game. I mean, tore them apart. That was pretty awesome. Granted, USC's defense was horrific this year, but I think it speaks volumes on national television. When they're playing on New Year's Day or whatever it was. You're getting all those eyeballs, and he's just shredding Lincoln Riley to death, and he can't do anything to stop it. That was pretty eye-popping. This is in my opinion, this is a running back deep class. I think I see 10 to 15 running backs that could be, that in my opinion, are top 4 round grades. Granted, many in the NFL community, where their opinion actually matters, value running backs much differently than I do, because they aren't fantasy players. They are trying to win football games, and obviously the shelf life of running back is much shorter than anybody else on the field. So I look at him and I say he could be a day 2 pick, but given that in another year, I think he is a day 2 pick. And this year, I think it just depends on your flavor of the week. I think it just depends on the team and the fit. But I love that pull from you, because he's a name I think that I will be looking for myself in fantasy rookie drafts. In terms of Badgent, dude, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because this is a guy that had D1 offers to transfer out after his junior year in D2 at Shepherd, and chose not to. Didn't love what he saw. I don't know if he wasn't getting the Power 5 interest that he thought he would. But came back and had a really special year. And what is he, the touchdown or the yards? Is he the touchdown or yards leader in the NCAA history?
I think touchdown.
Touchdown. Thank you. So, I mean, anytime we'll go with it. Yeah. Forgive me for not having that specific stat, but I mean, anytime you can have that claim to fame next to your name, I mean, somebody's going to take a shot to see what you got, So I think, as you mentioned, it will be very intriguing to see not only what he looks like for the Senior Bowl, but his combine, his pro day. I think those are all very important and pivotal moments in his draft stock to see whether he's going to be a 4th round pick, a 7th round pick, or a UDFA.
Exactly. And I know that it's fun to talk about Senior Bowl, like you mentioned with Josh Palmer last year. There's a lot of names that you maybe not be front of mind if they don't go to your alma mater, but when those kind of names pop up, you follow it, and then it kind of comes to fruition in that way of because I want to say, was he a 5th round pick, or was he 3rd?
Who's this?
Josh Palmer.
I believe he was a 3rd round pick. Okay. I believe he was the 3rd round pick from the Chargers.
I mean, that's not too late by any means. Yeah. But I mean, he certainly grabbed that opportunity, and like you mentioned, with
exactly.
You got Keenan Allen getting older still. You got Mike Williams. But if we're going to jump over to the more well-known rookies, I'm going to strip a little bit of fun out of here, though. We know who maybe is the 1 or the 1 and 2, what have you. So we're going to do 2023 rookie watch, and it'll be, if not, and I'll name a couple players, then who. So maybe who would be your next person at that position. So at the quarterback, if not Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, then.
Oh, that's tough because I feel that leaves me Will Levis or Anthony Richardson, and I think I would take Anthony Richardson at that point just on the ability. To me, he quite simply he's Cam Newton light. Not just because Cam Newton started at Florida, but he's got the size, the speed, the athleticism, the arm strength. Has to work on the accuracy, very similar to Cam Newton. Inconsistent at times. Well, he's very inconsistent at times. So, he's the old cliche of a project. He's not somebody that's coming in year one. He definitely needs a year to sit. And so Patrick Mahomes had a year to sit. So, there's nothing wrong with that. So I think I would go with him. Will Levis, I struggle with, not that you particularly asked, but I'll be brief. But Will Levis will turn 24 in June. And I was a big Kenny Pickett proponent last year who also turned 24 last June. But Will skipped his bowl game, which not that big of a deal in today's age, but he's skipping the Senior Bowl after the invite. He's not going to throw at the combine. And so that leaves his pro day. And for somebody who had a lackluster year, I've heard all the noise about, Kentucky wasn't strong this year. Didn't have Wan'Dale Robinson or an elite receiver to throw to. I get it. But even still, I would have liked to seen something a little more from Will, or at least for him to showcase, hey, I want this. This is not only the player that I'm hyped to be, but this is who I am, and this is what I will be in the NFL. And so I keep thinking, what are you hiding? And so I think that's another reason why it's almost like, I'm taking, in my opinion, the lesser of the two evils. And, is the devil worse than the devil you don't, or the other way around?
I completely agree in terms of I'm a huge Richardson fan. That snappy release is so exciting to watch. I definitely see that Cam Newton comparison, and I think in the right offense, a lot of RPO type action. I think as they work on his decision making, ideally he is able to sit for that first year. I don't see how he's an early enough pick to where they make him start. Yep. But I mean, if he has to, he has to. It's the NFL. But yeah, in terms of Will Levis, the age is one thing, but then he does have a incredibly quick, strong arm. But I have to believe, with all of the stuff that he's turning down to not show his talents or possibly lack thereof, I don't know if it's that he has such sincere belief and confidence that his agent or whoever else has said, we've got some people interested in you. And maybe not to say like, don't show them that you're not worth it, but I don't think you need to do anything. Like, these other guys may jump over you in some teams' eyes, but there's enough teams that we feel like you're going to be that top 5, top 10 at worst NFL pick, and you're going to go to, a team and get paid. So if you go and you have, a poor senior and you get outplayed by some of these guys that they didn't even know, was it Jaron Duran at a BYU? If you go out there and get outplayed by one of these other guys, then you're screwed. Then you're out of top 15, top 20, and then it's going to tumble. So I don't know. Somebody had to tell him something, because that's just so bizarre to me.
Agreed.
Yeah. But a fun position, and one you mentioned that is very deep in this rookie class, running back. And if not Bijan or Gibbs, then that's a tough one, Chew. I think a lot of it will depend on the team that drafts stock. But knowing what I know today, I think I would take my heart over my head, and I would go Sean Tucker from Syracuse. Mm-hmm. He's had a really special couple of years. And I'm an ACC grad, obviously Virginia Tech Hokie. And he's been very successful against Virginia Tech. And another running back who's been very successful against Virginia Tech, who had over 300 yards against them this year, was Israel Benakanda from Pittsburgh. So I think Benakanda might not have the size and speed to be a second or third round pick, but I think today I would go Sean Tucker with an eye towards sort of like who's in the back of my mind for a later pick of, who's
somebody that could be a late round steal. It's a Benekanda. But let's just say I couldn't have Sean Tucker. I would go straight to Kendre Miller from TCU. I think that he was a large portion of why they were able to make the title game. And I think the fact that he was not in the title game caused them not to score more than 7 points. I won't say they wouldn't have gotten blown out. I think they would have, but I think they would have scored more than 7 with Kendre.
Yeah, that was an interesting development in how that game ended up going for TCU, and ultimately how Kendre Miller could be viewed there, because I mean he wasn't able to play. It wasn't like he was just all healthy and sitting it out, but that he wasn't able to play. They got whooped, and we can kind of guess and project what it would have been. It would have at least been different and been better for TCU, but that kind of gives NFL people and fantasy people the impact of like, this is a complete guy. We already know that, but look how badly TCU got whooped. It likely would have still happened, but Kendre Miller would have still been a difference maker for that offense. And Sean Tucker, of course, I mean, I'm curious to see what he runs. I know he's got that track speed, if I remember correctly. And having track speed with that kind of a frame is fairly terrifying, but I'd like to think that would allow him to withstand the trials and tribulations of an NFL season. And at a minimum, I would say be a part of a committee that if he is the more durable of the 2 or 3 in a committee, that allows him to be the one that is last man standing as injuries and things stack up there.
Sure.
And I'll just throw my hat into the ring here with Charbonnet, I believe is I'm saying it correctly. There's an accent right there. Zach Charbonnet, I was very excited watching him and hoping he was going to come out last year. I was kind of surprised why he didn't. I know he's a bit older as a running back prospect. I think he's 22. But the size, the speed, I'm worried as someone who drafted a bit of this guy that he's going to be an Isaiah Spiller result in terms of once he gets to the NFL, it's just not going to really translate. But I feel like Charbonnet is a better, more complete player than what Spiller was. But I know Spiller's stock seemed to kind of be doing pretty well throughout the college football season. It kind of teetered off, didn't get the draft capital, and then once he got to the NFL with the Chargers, he turned into what the draft capital said, which was just another guy. So I'm hoping Charbonnet does actually get capital that will warrant him getting opportunity to be hopefully a leader in a committee. I think he could do a little bit of everything, so I'm excited to see how that one goes.
Yeah, Charbonnet, I mean, after the transfer from Michigan, when he's leading the backfield in UCLA, he was a stud last year. And in running backs, if you have a stellar year and you're draft eligible, you get going. Mm-hmm. And he came back this year and he was strong, but not amazing, and was outshined by, a handful of other running backs around the country. So, I think he's an interesting choice. The Isaiah Spiller comparison was interesting. I hope that he's a little quicker. I shouldn't say quicker, but faster than Spiller. And so I think, he's yet another running back in that second, third, fourth round mix. By the way, Spiller wasn't even the best running back on his own team. And, you had Devin Etienne, who, if not for being 5'9", we'll see what he measures at the combine, but that guy is special. I mean, to me, he is Darren Sproles 2.0, but I think I still want to see what exactly he measures at the combine before I say, if not Gibbs or Bijan Robinson, then it's A-Chain instead of Sean Tucker. I think I just need to see how big he is first, because I love Jared Patterson from Buffalo. I mean, more than anybody else, but yeah, your boy. But we can't use 2 of those in the league.
No, and I do like the comparison. I know a lot of people, in terms of a smaller running back that has enough size to handle within the tackles, but also be just an absolute receiving threat. And they always talk about the Alvin Kamara comparisons. But I do love that you're going with the Darren Sproles, because I think people tend to forget that Darren Sproles was a bully for his size. He was basically, if Steve Smith was going to be a running back, that's what he was. He was just different for the length of time that he was able to withstand that beating in that Philadelphia backfield was pretty incredible. So I like that. So jumping over to the wide receivers. So if not JSN or Addison, then
I mean, this is not a strong wide receiver class. And so I think it's got to be QJ, Quentin Johnston from TCU. But this is a guy who I think he had like 3 or 4 catches in his first 2 or 3 games of the season. So he kind of disappeared before he had like a huge coming out party over the final 3 quarters of the season. He balled out in the semifinal against Michigan. They could not cover him. And at that point, you're arguing, okay, this is the best wide receiver in the draft class. And then he shows up against Georgia and has 1 reception for 3 yards, and you're like, okay, am I getting the next version of the TCU wide receiver? And let's see here. You could go with Corey Coleman from Baylor. You could go with Rashawn Woods from Oklahoma State. You could go with the TCU receiver who's now on the Vikings. He was drafted like 17 overall by the Eagles. Jalen Reagor. What's his name? Josh Doxson from TCU 3 or 4 years ago.
I forgot he was TCU. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and then West Virginia guy Kevin White. These are guys that ball out in the Big 12, and I'm just concerned that this guy's not the next Des Bryant. He's the next Rashawn Woods. Both of those guys were Oklahoma State, but don't give me Jalen Reagor, don't give me Josh Doxson. Give me what Quentin Johnston looks like against that semifinal, not what he was against Georgia.
The one that sticks in my mind, I guess, it's because it's one of the more recent with being Jalen Reagor. I forgot the litany of other receivers, like you're mentioning, that kind of, they do that well in college and in that conference, and it just doesn't really seem to translate. And I don't know if it's necessarily a conference thing. I don't know if it's a level of competition thing, or if there's just none of them are related. They just all happen to have not worked out. But he does have that unbelievable size speed that I understand why an NFL team, you see him at his best, you see his physicality and his speed, and you think we can figure this out. And I don't know if sometimes it's the hubris of NFL GMs and owners to think we can fix him. It's like, you may be able to. I know it's easier to be tall and fast and then maybe refine some skills than it is to give someone platform shoes and try to have them run down the field. But some of the time it's just, if you technically have that understanding and that feel and have good hands and can understand where to sit in zones and how to get through off bump and run, that sometimes is maybe better and easier to kind of sculpt and mold. So I'm hoping he can, maybe right the wrongs of those other receivers that you mentioned there. And a guy I was interested in part because I was very high on his quarterback from last year, Josh Downs at a UNC.
Nice.
And very much hoping that certainly that he goes to a good situation, but also because I know he's not the alpha. That's not the size. That's not what he does. But he's someone who is a bit smaller, but I think is a very refined route runner. I think is someone who is just slippery. He's not, I don't know what he's going to run in terms of his 40, but he has that field speed and he has great hands and he just has a great sense of, where he is on the football field and what to do. So, he did very well with Sam Howell. He did very well after Sam Howell. And I am hoping he's not going to turn out like the previous couple of UNC receivers, De'Ami Brown and is it Daz Newsome? So the guy. So I'm hoping he can be the better of that trio there in the NFL.
Yeah, I agreed with you. I really like Josh Downs as well. And then you said it. I mean, is he going to be De'Ami Brown, who was a 3rd round pick of the Commanders, or is he going to be Daz Newsome, who got cut after 1 year, was a 6th round pick of the Bears, and I'm not even sure if he landed back in another team in the league, but or is he something different? So I'm very curious about Josh Downs and where he lands. But I'm with you. I think he's got the ability to be special, and I think that he's probably a early Friday night pick in the NFL draft. This spring.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the last position here, and last but not least, we'll see how deep the class ends up being, as we talked about Musgrave earlier. But if not Michael Mayer, then
yeah, we talked about Musgrave, and it could very well end up being him. But I think as of today, it's Dalton Kincaid. He's great. He played really well this season. He played well against Florida early on in the year, even though they lost that game. And he's one of those high character, high motor type players. He reminds me some of George Kittle. You got to be careful on that comparison. A lot healthier than George Kittle. But I think above and beyond it's Dalton Kincaid. Musgrave is right there in the mix after Mayer, and then I think it drops off. But again, it's Dalton Kincaid, and I don't see myself making the switch, but Musgrave has some potential there too.
Yeah, Dalton Kincaid, what he was able to do in that offense, I could see it being almost like maybe like a Zach Ertz-esque in terms of, he's an athletic guy. He's got great hands. I'm trying to remember. That's the best I can think of right now. I mean, he's a very exciting player. Like, he was exciting to watch in college. Yeah. And I know the offense very, very much went through. It was him, and I thought there was another tight end before he had gotten injured that they were heavily. That's kind of like where the offense flowed through. But that's, if it's not going to be Michael Mayer, who to most, if not all, is the safe. He's the more athletic Cole Kmet. He's just, if you think of it, today's tight end who can do a bit of everything, at least at an average, if not above average level, it's Michael Mayer. Dalton Kincaid, I don't think he's that, but I think at least as a receiver, he in this class is probably second to none. So as fantasy players, then you think, all right, well, tight end premium or not, would I rather pick Michael Mayer at the back end of the first, early second, or could I wait a bit more, and the value of getting Kincaid a bit later is going to be more fruitful for me. So I'm very curious to see how the tight end rooms and for fantasy football shake out there.
Well said.
Well, Jake, I think we've talked a little bit of college football. I've gotten a nice roast. I think I need to go ahead and check myself for some sear marks. But guest always gets the last word, and a shout out, a quote, a cheers, whatever is on your mind, go for it.
Yeah, one football related and one more father related. No, I'm not having a child. But yeah, amen. But I think in terms of Dynasty, Chew, I tell you that I haven't been on the show since preseason, and I felt the need to call myself out for some of my hot takes for early in the season. And I was really not feeling a lot of the rookie love going into this year. To name a few: Greg Dulcich, Romeo Doubs, Isaiah Likely, the brothers Isaiah Likely, or the law firm of Isaiah and Pacheco and Likely. But I was dead wrong. And I'll start with Dulcich, who was a third-round pick. And I think he had 5 weeks as a top 10 tight end with the enigma of Russell Wilson this year, which is pretty special. And I know he missed a lot of time being Dulcich because of a hamstring, but he looks the part. I mean, he was a walk-on in the Pac-12 at UCLA. By the time he left, he was first team all Pac-12. And he continues to emerge, and that was pretty special what he did as a tight end in year one. By the way, I had suggested that Albert Okwuegbunam, my guy, would be a top 10 tight end late going into the year. Yeah, our guy. He had one top 10 week, and I think it was the last week of the season when Greg Dulcich was also sitting. Yeah, that was not pretty, not my best moment. And even when, I think the Broncos were even talking about benching Albert O at one point. So not my best take, but on to the rookies for just a second. I couldn't even pronounce Romeo Doubs' name to start the year. I can now. He had 42 catches at 10.1 yards per target with Aaron Rodgers. Not too shabby when they also had Christian Watson. And then the brothers Isaiah Likely, who's the backup to Mark Andrews, third-round pick or fourth-round pick, irregardless. He's the backup to one of the best tight ends in the league. And they also have Rashad Bateman, who's a second-round pick from the year prior. Bateman spent a lot of time injured. Mark Andrews also dealt with some injuries this year. But Likely had 36 catches, 373 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Not bad for a backup tight end. Like, he flashed pretty considerably this year and showed that he's, that he's not only fantasy, not only is he worthy of being on a fantasy team, but, could be startable at some point in the near future. And then Isaiah Pacheco, 4.9 yards per attempt, 13 catches on the regular season. That could certainly be bolstered in his future. But the man looks possessed in the playoffs. 95 yards against the Jaguars, and then a career high 5 catches for 59 yards against Cincinnati. I mean, he looks like the running back to trust, even going into next year, irregardless of the situation of who's the LSU running back they took in the first round 2 years ago, who's hurt all the time.
Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I can't even think of the guy, but I mean, it looks like Pacheco's seat, and the guy was a 7th round pick. I mean, that's pretty special what he's been able to do. So I just had to call myself out for some really poor takes because I was not buying in some of this rookie hype. I think the only one I got right was Jalen Tolbert from the Cowboys. And of course, the team I like is the rookie who sucks. I think he had one catch all season long. So yeah, congrats to myself. And in terms of the father piece, Chew, I tell you that over the last 4 days, I spent some time with fellow Dynasty League mate Matthew Harris, who's my cousin. I spent some time with his daughter and son. And then last night, I got the opportunity to babysit another Dynasty League mate, Tyler Daly, and his wife, Megan Daly's daughter. I got to babysit her. And just to spend time over the last 4 days with those children reminded me, somebody who doesn't have children, just the sheer joy, the raw emotion in a positive way that children, infants can bring out of you is like nothing else. It's a feeling that you can't get in this world outside of those babies. I mean, I know you live it with your son, but my goodness, like it just reminded me that, I don't know what God's plan is for me, but, should I have the opportunity to be a father? I mean, I know there are going to be some sleepless nights, more than some, but I think the last few days have reminded me just how special being a father could be. Just the sheer love I have for those children who aren't my children is pretty telling about the child that I could love one day that could be my own.
Jake, very much looking forward to you entering the fatherhood ranks. I know that you're going to love it. I always say it's the best, most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. It's only because it's like
I'm writing that down.
Yeah. If you look at the percentage of, like a lot of the time where it's like you're trying to figure things out because just the moment that you actually think, I got it, you immediately don't got it. But it's more of like, it's a challenge to be like, you keep chasing it to be like, but I want to get it. And then, it's kind of the balance of understanding, like, I'm never going to figure it out because it's always going to change, but it's always worth it to kind of go through the process of figuring out. Cause then it's, you learn a lot about yourself, about, about your partner, about your kid, even in terms of just as they grow and, they come to you and they say something and, they start understanding context. They tell you, they say a word that you didn't think they even knew. Hopefully it's not a 4-letter word. But it's just so many things, it can be frustrating. It can be exciting, but I mean, I know the day that Finn was born, it was the best moment of my life. And, it's something that it's life-changing. And, through the ups and the downs, it's one of the best things in the world. So looking forward to hearing that news whenever you decide to share it with me, Jake.
Thanks, brother.
Absolutely. Well, Jake, I love that also you decided to are now donning that lovely little scarf there for your lovely local soccer team, but represent. There it is. Yeah, buddy. Well, Jake, I sincerely appreciate you coming on. Glad to have you. Glad to see you. Looking forward to seeing you later this month, starting tomorrow, later in February, to celebrate your soon-to-be nuptials. And you stay classy, all right?
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you.